Hello there, sword friends. Today I'm going to review this sword for you right here. It is the Ronin Katana European War Sword number 3, version 2, because it's got the little writing on it like the Harriet Dean sword that it draws some historical inspiration from. Anyway, before you hear me ramble about this particular sword, there's a couple things you should know. One, this is a second-hand sword, and second-hand swords, they may have some issues that are difficult to account for in the process of reviewing. They may bounce around a lot due to poor packing or any number of other things that could degrade the condition so that it's not representative of what you'd expect to get if you were to buy one from the sword company, Ronin, for example, brand new. Anyway, I think it's pretty representative, but do know that it's secondhand. Also know that Ronin has sent me European sword review samples and katana review samples in the past. This doesn't happen to be one of them. I bought this one secondhand with my own monies, as I noted, but they have sent me review samples in the past. Also know that I'm not a student of historic European martial arts. I don't know what I'm doing when I swing these swords around, so as you hear me ramble about this, how it works, how it performs, just know that I'm an enthusiast, not an expert, and so take what I say with a grain of salt. Anyway, I'm going to shut up and, well, I'm not going to shut up. I'm actually going to ramble a lot more, but it'll be about the sword now. Now, if you're looking for a historical overview, I am not your guy. I'm a poor student of history, and I don't know much about this sword, its typology, its history, how prolific it was, how obscure it was, who used it, or when or where they might have used it. But I do know from a modern context, the Type 18C blade, this big, imposing, cool-looking type of sword here, this Oakshot Type 18 style of blade, is really widely regarded as a great geometry for competition cutting. If you are in the historic European martial arts community and you want to do competition tatami mat type cutting, which is a thing that seems to happen, or at least some sort of cutting to soft to medium targets, then this geometry seems to be the preferred one, at least if you want an easy button for cutting. Now, I don't know if the Ronin Katana is really going to deliver on the same promises as the Albion Principe and Albion Alexandria. Those two blades have really helped create that impression in the cutting community, at least as I'm able to see. This one, while it looks similar, equally imposing and daunting perhaps, it's dynamically very different, and that can certainly impact how the blade cuts. It could improve or change, but I guess I'll ramble about the dynamics in just a moment. Anyway, just know that it's different, and from a modern context, other than it looking really cool on your wall, well, it's great for cutting shit too, which I guess it's a sword, perhaps you'd think it would be. I'm going to review some of the things on Ronin Katana's website, and the thing I want to first point out is I'm calling this a Type 18C sword modeled after the Harriet Dean sword, and I think it's really apparent that that's the case. But Ronin Katana isn't selling it as a Type 18C sword, and it's not calling it a museum replica of the Harriet Dean sword. It obviously draws some historical, inspiration from that sword, but it's not sold as a replica of that sword, and I suppose that's one thing to note. Also note, it's supposed to be made out of through-hardened 1075. I don't really harp on that stuff much, because as long as the sword does sword activities well, I don't really care what it's made from, and I don't have a way as a reviewer of validating that it is 1075 or some other type of thing. The other bit to note, other than what I will cover in the features and all of that, is that it comes with a scabbard, and I'm not going to talk about the scabbard honestly very much, but there are some things to note about it. One, the fact that it exists. It comes with one and this little belt thingy. Now, I can't really figure out how to attach a sumbitch, but I'm sure somebody more intelligent than me can figure it out. Do know that the sword comes out, it falls out of the scabbard pretty easy. And it also has a little bit of a rattle, but it's not significant. Still, it comes with a wood cord scabbard. It has a little metal chape at the end. Overall, it's classy looking. And the important bit is that this sword is $450. There are not a lot of Type 18C blades available, or blades of this style available, other than the Albion Principe and Albion Alexandria, which is what looks most similar to this, and which I've compared in an earlier video. I will put a link in the description of that video down below as well. The point is, though, that this is $450. The Albion iterations are over $1,300, so this is much less expensive if you want a blade like this. Anyway, to see if it's worth your money or not, I suppose I will talk about the features and all of that now. So we have a wheel pommel here, and this is something I have come to find less tasteful in this particular sword as I've swung around the Albion Alexandria and this one in the same cutting day. I really found that the short grip with this wheel pommel was less desirable than I anticipated, though it should be noted that this one didn't hurt my hand. While it wasn't terribly comfortable to use in terms of the length of the grip, the Albion one actually loosened up. The kind of almost sharp edges on here, they don't cut into my hand, but I suppose I was able to get a little bit more purchase. It didn't slip out of my hand as easily as the Albion iteration did. Anyway, this is a relatively simple wheel pommel. You could put some sort of coin in here if you found one of the right dimension. It doesn't have a lot of dimension this way though. It's just a simple looking wheel pommel. In terms of the peen, you can make out that it has one here. It's sanded over. It's pretty nicely finished. I can barely feel that it's there. You can kind of just tell from the color contrast that it's there. Now you can see that the wheel pommel is flattened in this area here. I didn't find any discomfort in using this barehanded. I imagine with gloves it would maybe even be easier, but there's no schmutz or ugliness or epoxy or residue along the area where the wheel pommel meets the grip. And even though these edges are crisp and almost, they're not sharp, but they're definitely not as refined or kind of tampered down as the Albion iteration is. Though I found that to actually be a boon when I was moving it around. The Albion was really slippery when my hands got even a little bit wet. This one, the ledges on there, I think aided in keeping it stable in my hands. In terms of the grip, I really actually like the feel of this grip. Now, it's not long enough for me for a sword of this size. Personally, the shortness of the grip was a little bit of a detractor on both the Albion Alexandria as well as this one. But the point is that I like this actual feeling of the grip. It's a soft leather, and it doesn't move under my hands under pressure, but these large ridges in here really give me a good feeling. I'm able to really grab the sword and it doesn't move around in my hand. Now you can see it has a little bit of taper in this direction, not so much on this side though. It's pretty uniform in thickness here, but does taper here. I didn't have any problem indexing the blade. My cutting, as you'll see later, did not go terribly well, but that's more due to my skill, and indexing is certainly part of that. The one thing I would say is less than ideal is this relatively substantial seam along here. Now, the seam didn't come loose in my usage, but I haven't really put this to any kind of strenuous testing. The seam is soft though. I can move it around. It's not uncomfortable. It doesn't bite into my hand, but it does make me wonder how long it'll hold up. Anyway, I didn't find it to be problematic, and it's really easy for me to tell with this seam here which edge I'm using, I suppose, or to at least remember which edge I was using. Anyway, I'm gonna stop jerking the sword off here and move on. Now, where the sword meets there, where the grip meets the crossguard, again, no residue, no epoxy, no yucky bits along the side here. Overall, a very clean presentation, which you'd be able to see if my camera were participating with me. Anyway, well done. The grip is also relatively flat. You can probably notice that it doesn't overlap the crossguard significantly. There are some small spots that it does, but overall it's pretty easy to see that it doesn't have a bad transition in this area. Now, what would bad be? If the grip was much larger than I guess it would just be off-putting in terms of the aesthetics. I don't know that would impact functionality at all, but it would look jarring to the eye. In terms of the crossguard, you can see it has a similar crossguard to the Harriet Dean sword. It's got this central little diamond section here. One side appears to be crisper than the other, though the overall presentation on the crossguard is pretty good. It's small but functional, and I manage not to poke myself in the head with it when I swing the sword, so I like that, which is something I typically do with these very large pointy quillian swords. Anyway, they gradually thin out into a hexagon, which is how the quillian terminates here. You can see that the quillians here terminate in a little hexagon shape. Now, these are a little smaller than some of the other options in terms of quillian termination, but I don't know that really matters. Anyway, I managed not to poke myself in the head with them, so that's good, because the smaller ones would be presumably hurtier. One of the other things I often harp on is the gap in the crossguard and the blade. It's something that, granted, historical medieval swords didn't have, really tight, clean gaps all the time. Perhaps some examples did, some certainly did not. But I would say that this is actually overall quite good. The Albion's is a little tighter, but the Albion is much more expensive. Overall, for a $450 sword, this crossguard gap seems pretty attentive. It's not bad. It's pretty consistent across, and there's not much gap at all. Now this one also has this Arabic writing. I think it's Arabic, maybe it's not, but it has this writing on the ricasso section. I don't exactly know what it says. Well, not exactly. I definitely have no idea what it says. Somebody told me once, and it went in one ear and out the other. Anyway, you can see that the detailing on here is actually pretty good. I like how clean and crisp it is. I think it's certainly a fun addition to the sword in terms of its historical influence. Not all of the Type 3 swords have this. This version 2, the limited edition, has this this engraving or this carving on the blade here to match the historical inspiration. I don't honestly know how well it matches though either. Anyway, you can see it here for yourself. Now I'm going to tell you about the blade, and a couple things I want to note. The polish on the steel is actually somewhere between satin and a mirror polish, and I have to say I like the aesthetics of this slightly shinier polish. The downside is it shows blemishes a lot easier and stains a lot easier. When it was shipped to me, it came kind of pre-blemished. We would call it saya rub in the katana side of things, but basically sitting in the scabbard and rattling as it's shipped across the pond or across the country creates these small blemishes, which are a little easier to see with the higher grade polish. So one downside, though if you intend on using it, I suppose it doesn't really matter. It's going to get blemished no matter what kind of polish it has or really how gentle you are with it. There'll be scratches and blemishes and things like that. Anyway, the other bit to note is that there are ripples in the surface of the steel, though they're not terribly crazy or bad. And the central ridge is pretty straight and it doesn't wobble or waver around, at least not noticeably to me. The thing to note is that that central ridge is very soft, and that seems to be consistent with many of the Type 18C swords that I have seen, as the central ridge isn't terribly crisp. It's not a terribly flexible blade, it's pretty rigid despite how thin it is, and I'll put dimensions and all of that in the description down below, and I'll show the weapon dynamics computer, because in terms of moving this sword around, I would say that this is a stout, not terribly fun sword to move around. In comparison to the Albion, which has a point of balance much closer to the hilt, and despite this one weighing a little less, it still feels quite a bit heavier in the hand to move around. Not crazy, and sometimes that additional kind of mass somewhere up here, that point to balance being higher, makes it feel a little tip heavy, and sometimes that people prefer that when they're cutting. But I found it to be a little harder in comparison to the Albion to get the blade to land exactly where I wanted it to, and to get the tip to go exactly where I wanted it to. The tip doesn't move, it doesn't feel as controllable or connected as it does in the Albion iteration. I don't know how you would correct that. In the previous video I tried adding a bunch of weight to the pommel, and it didn't really change much in terms of the dynamics of the sword, or didn't affect the point of balance as much as I personally thought it would. Anyway, so I don't know how you would fix that or change that in this particular sword, but it is something certainly worth noting that if you want a Type 18C sword, supposedly from a historical context, the point of balance is much closer to the hilt than it is on this particular blade, and that could certainly impact how you use it for training. If you're looking for a historically accurate training tool in a Type 18C variety, I don't know that this is necessarily going to hit the mark. Aesthetically, it has the look, but dynamically, I think it's missing and it's a little overbuilt. That said, if you want to whack shit in your backyard on the cheap, then this is perhaps a better variety for that type of activity. It's a little overbuilt, perhaps. Anyway, I'm going to show you some of the cutting that I did with the sword. I whacked a cucumber in a tatami mat. A little difficult to control. I bet I can make it through here. Yeah, totally. Kind of like some of the cool needles. Not really. Gonna do a couple whacks on used Japanese tatami here. We will see how well it does. I'm not really expecting it to be great, given that the edge doesn't feel terribly sharp. I think I'm gonna cut with this side because it feels marginally sharper. Well, I don't know that I'm going to prove a whole lot more here, so I'm going to stop and maybe use this on a sword that is, well, will let me cut with it. Now I've had a little bit of time to reflect on the cutting performance of this sword, and what bears re-mentioning is that this edge is not terribly sharp. And whether it came from the factory that way or it was due to it being secondhand, it doesn't really matter. The fact is it's not terribly sharp, and I'm not a very experienced cutter, particularly with this type of sword. So the fact that it cut through it at all may be a testament to that this geometry supports cutting pretty well. Also note that I was cutting used Japanese tatami mats, which are a little more difficult than tatami mat to cut. They can be pretty dense and tough to cut, and I'm most used to using a katana to move through them. Very often the katana I use is very, very sharp, and this is not. So naturally it didn't cut as well. I would say though that if you have any competence in putting a keen edge on a sword, this seems to have the geometry to support it. It doesn't have a very pronounced secondary bevel, if there's really one at all, and I think if you put a keener edge on it, it would work really well. The other thing though is it's not just that it wasn't terribly sharp. Uncomfortable cutting was also due to this little bitty handle. If I put two hands on it, I don't know, it's not terribly comfortable, and holding the pommel here wasn't great. In comparison, it'd be nice if there was a competition cutting variety with a similar blade, but also a longer handle and perhaps a fishtail. I've really come to like that idea of a sword, something that would allow me to get a little bit more purchase on the handle and have a little bit more control over it. Get out of my fucking cup. Get out of there. Get it. Get it. Go away, bug. Eek! Bugs! And then there's a custom sword that you could certainly commission from a competent smith, but chances are that's going to be a bug in my face. Come on, bug. You trying to get me to cut myself? Dick. It's on my neck. Look at this. Son of a bitch. You flew in my beard. Now's the part of the review where I answer the question, do I personally think the sword is worth it or not? And yes is the answer to that. $450, I think it's a great value. It comes with a scabbard, it has some artistic embellishments that pay homage to the historical blade that inspired it. It's big, imposing, it looks cool on a wall, it feels good in your hand. Overall, I think it's a good sword. For $450, I think it's a great value. I would certainly say that the Albion, the Principe, or most notably the Alexandria, in comparing these two, are really the only two mass production Type 18C blades that I'm aware of. It's possible you could get one custom made, but in any case, most of them that are out there are more expensive than this. This is about a third of the price of the Albion, and so it's a much less expensive sword if you're looking for a Type 18C. It might make the typology approachable versus unattainable. So do I think it's worth it? Yeah, it held up, it didn't break in half. It could be sharper, and if you're competent at putting an edge on things, then I'm sure the sword will do much better for you than it did for me. Would I rather have this or an Albion? All things being equal, I'd rather have the Albion. It feels more controllable, more nimble, it's a little bit more impressive a sword, but they're not equal. This is a third of the price, and I don't think it's a third of the sword. It's big, imposing, fun, and cool looking. If you do care dynamically about it being historically accurate to the way a Type 18C is supposed to feel, this may not be the thing for you. If you really want to compete in a high-level cutting match in historic European martial arts, I certainly feel like the Albion iterations might have a leg up, or a custom variety. But if you just want a Type 18C sword, something big, awesome, cool, and imposing, well, $450 gets you a lot of sword. I think it's a good value. Anyway, that's all I've got. I hope the video has been helpful. As always, cheers, and thanks for watching.